Joe and Channel here over at SubStars. So Cracker Barrel changes their logo. Great, but I mean, there's still no mass deportations, Epstein list, border wall. Instead, he's importing Indians and Chinese to take your places in colleges and jobs. He didn't abolish any federal agency or do any mass firings or prosecute anyone, which kind of would be inherent in the message of draining the swamp. It's like, well, if it's business as usual and nothing has changed, how precisely have you changed the swamp at all? And he bombed Iran for Israel, which your taxes fund billions of dollars a year, as well as Ukraine and various other countries. And, most people will go, if we have homeless tent cities in America, and such excess taxes available, which doesn't make sense because the country's in debt for $34 trillion, well, then either pay off that debt or just simply lower taxes if you truly have no intent of paying off the debt whatsoever. None of this makes sense until it makes sense, and then everything kind of makes sense. So the only thing that matters to a nation is its demographics. Not politically correct to say that when the left and even kind of the MAGA normies have this idea that it's a nation of ideas. No, I mean, you probably want to go back and read some of the earlier writings and who founded the country. Everything is downstream from demographics because there's no magic dirt. So no, Trump, we don't want 600,000 Chinese students in colleges, because that would mean that they'd be taking the place of American students who would have sat in those seats and gone to those colleges. That's just insane. That's not America first. That's actually China first. Or importing Indians for Elon Musk is India first. What you should do is simply train the Americans who are already here, who have been pushed out of those positions. Oh, but you'd have to pay them so they could live here under the quality of the standards of a first world civilization, and like get married, buy a house, and have kids, which means the corporations are going to profit a little bit less. It's like, well, that's the point of a country, so you don't have to compete with the entire world. Otherwise, why even bother having a country? Which is where we are now. So what happened to shutting down trade with China and bringing manufacturing back to America? Why is China the fastest growing economy in the world and America's on the decline? It's like we have a lot of people who need things to do. You simply don't need to have things made in China. You can make them in America and put those people to work. So actually turns out that Trump didn't do what he was elected to do, and is actually going to make things worse for the real Americans. It would have been better to elect Kamala Harris because as much of a nightmare as that would have been, it would have been better to accelerate the collapse to where even the left wing would be forced to admit that this direction the country is going into this globalist open borders, replace the heritage Americans, is a complete failure, and to admit that there is no high trust, diverse society. The correlation between as diversity increases, trust decreases, bowling alone, 7-Eleven nationalism. Even the left wingers eventually will see that, and they'll have to wash off that brainwashing. And it shows you the power of brainwashing and social pressure, where people can't even admit that diversity is a weakness, because it always has been. Historically, and it is right now. You can simply look around at any city where they changes happen, demographic changes happen. Anyway, people keep defending Trump when it's obvious that there's something going on with the Epstein Island / Israeli blackmail operation, Dershowitz, Maxwell, etc., that has something on his associates. And to be fair, it might just be more likely that both sides of the aisle are complete degenerates who rape children. And if that's the reality, someone says, like, if this Mossad Island information came out, it would require, firing half the government. Okay, America is absolutely A-okay. If half the government is blackmailed by Mossad, then it's time to obviously divest ourselves from that country, but also to replace the government and maybe this time have term limits in place. you can't repair something this corrupt. It has to start over. And if the truth can kill a narrative, then it needs to die. But yes, the Cracker Barrel stuff is an example of the cultural Bolshevism that has destroyed the country, where the restaurant had a brand and a country vibe. It is fake. It's a corporation. It's not a single family-owned restaurant or something. Maybe it was back in 1969. But anytime like something branches out, it's like, well, it turns into something else. And if it's going on long enough, it's not owned by the original people anymore. It has nothing to do with the original brand. But there's a certain amount of willing suspension of disbelief going on when you go into something that's themed. Then they remove anything that tells you the vibe of the place, and they change the interior to look like every other hamburger and onion ring place or whatever it is they sell. The funny thing is, I don't have one within 100 miles, is all restaurants have done the same redesign with their buildings. All the fast food restaurants used to have a unique building design, but they killed that and made the buildings look like everything else, which when they do their redesigns, was fair enough because restaurants come and go. Part of it is that if you have to sell the building, you want someone else to be able to just go right in there and sell there. You can't have like a Pizza Hut now selling another, fast food or another something else. The bad news is a lot of the building changes was the old design had these rain protection overhangs. And one of the reasons they don't have that anymore is because there's so many homeless that they would just end up living under them. And you would have the police trying to evict those people day in, day out. So so what businesses do is they just get rid of that rain protection. So you walk from the rain directly into the building. It's like, doesn't that feel kind of cold and evil? It's like, yeah, welcome to America in current year. And in case you haven't noticed, all this post-Hart Celler, mid-60s, diversity is our strength. Well, now we have homeless tent cities because the labor market is a situation where there's too much supply. So they can't demand high wages to buy homes. It's why you get this false economic messages like every place is hiring, which confuses the boomers, who I guess don't understand what inflation, the value of the dollar, has changed over the past 100 years. You always see trucking companies hiring because the pay is low for the work, so there's a ton of turnover, which ends up in getting people from the third world who, for them, it's a fine deal so they can send money home. And as it turns out in America and Canada, well, they're just killing people because they're driving like they're coming from the third world, because they are. Because Schumer keeps bringing in third world people, so the businesses don't have to pay white people enough to buy homes and start families, because that's really what this is all about. They don't want that to happen. They don't want great big white families like they used to. And the one thing that kind of gets my curious is not enough people focus on the inflationary issue, which, like, isn't that an unconstitutional tax? Technically, that would be a constitutional argument. But it's a critical issue. And you look back at inflation, the value of dollar, the gold standard, and then feminism putting women into the workforce. And, even if you're hardcore feminist, or woman in your 40s now or over 50 maybe, and you look around the situation, I gotta guess, like, the majority of women over 50 now are looking back at the situation and go, yeah, that was a bad mistake. I mean, there's no way you can look at this and most women would say, yeah, the option was, 60, 70 years ago would have been to stay home, raise a family, and take care of your family. Or juxtapose that with go to work and create, stuff that ultimately doesn't matter. I gotta assume most women would look at this and go, yeah, feminism was astroturfed. And feminism has its own fascinating history because it was astroturfed. It was an op. Like so many things done in America in the West are not organic. There's little gremlins in the machines. So the jobs won't allow you to buy a house and raise a family because now you have to compete with people who will put eight people to a house, which raises the value of property, which BlackRock and Larry Fink own those homes. Anyway, and how sustainable is this all before a revolution? The problem is the country is already too diverse to fix in its entirety because the liberal is committed to the fiction that people are equal and it's just skin color, which is one of the dumber straw man arguments I've ever heard. You have to juxtapose mud huts with people who build cathedrals and try not to pee yourself laughing, which doesn't make sense because the third world is the third world because of the people who made it. America was America because it was made by European Americans, who at the last census were 57% of the population, which, and a lot of people are shocked when they find out that was the official census number years ago, to find out how low it was. They have a totally distorted view of America. Texas is like a white minority state. California is like a third white. Did people really not understand what open borders, Mexican open borders, or the pathway to Mexico? All of Latin America comes through those borders. Like, what do you think happens when you have open borders with high birth rate people? It's like California went from in the past 40 years went from like 80% white to like 35% white. The thing is, that last 57% census, I suspect that included people who identified as white but aren't actually European, so the numbers are kind of funky, where actual European Americans right now are probably half the population, which is an extreme problem because there's no magic dirt. There are magic people, us. That's why the third world goes to the white West, because Europe can build civilization, European people, to a level different from others, which is a careful way of saying it. White people are the golden goose, and America is coasting on this older white infrastructure. Unfortunately, it's breaking down now. It feels like Russia in the 80s, because their architectural engineering infrastructure literally was breaking down because of the poor build quality. So you had like hydroelectric dams were failing because the concrete wasn't put together correctly, because the rock wasn't sourced correctly, and the cement wasn't mixed correctly, and the metallurgy for the turbofans, same story. It just wasn't put together. It wasn't cast correctly. They just didn't care as much because it's like a socialist system. You get the worst out of people. They just don't care. So everything starts to collapse at once. And that's what happened with Russia. They looked at all these things failing simultaneously, these cascading systems of failure. And you look around America, and it's like bridges, for example. That's a great rabbit hole to go down, to look at the declining quality of roads and bridges. Well, those things are known as critical infrastructure. Anyway, all this is breaking down because the white population is too small. Also because of affirmative action and DEI. So white men are not in positions of power and influence in critical infrastructure, which would be the only way that America could keep going at a high level. Would be you'd have to put white people back. It's the same story with Rhodesia or South Africa, in which, to their credit, there are some of the folks down there who are aware of that situation. I mean, there's some like black folks who are native to Africa, obviously, who are looking at that and go, why don't we just put the white people back in charge? But that's not a popular sentiment, so it just turns into like compare current South Africa to what it was it 94 when they swapped over. So America is starting to turn into the second and third world. America overall is not a first world nation. It was in the 50s and 60s. First world nations have to be compared to other first world nations, and it was at least 50 years ago. But today, Japan, Korea, the Scandinavian countries, at least before the 2015 diversity push, those are first world nations. America is something between a first and a second world nation. America is firmly headed to Brazil meets South Africa territory. No, Trump didn't do any mass deportations. He's deporting a few hundred people a day. You would need to wholesale round up tens of thousands a day. You would massively expand ICE. I mean, by an order of magnitude. Get federal agencies putting everything aside and just working on the most critical issue for a nation, the demographic issue. None of that's happening. You're seeing you see a few well-publicized arrests a day, and they go Alcatraz, alligator in the swamp. It's like, Yeah, but that's still within the CONAS. They have to go outside the borders. You get that, right? We don't want them here. You just take them south, take them outside the continent of the United States. Building a holding cell here is kind of just, you're just moving people around within the country. They have to go outside the country. And it would have to be like, some days there would have to be 20,000 people actually deported per day. So it's like the whole country would have to go on a war footing to turn the country around and save it. And obviously, you can look around, friends, that is not happening. It would need numbers that big to start lowering housing costs and raising the value of labor and the dollar. The bubonic plagues throughout Europe are kind of good examples of what happens when supply and demand changes. Instead, he wants to give everyone here illegally who's in a college a green card, so his buddies can pay them less for your jobs, so they can pay them 70% instead of paying you. So white people can't buy a home and raise kids. And I keep mentioning European Americans because, like I said, they're the golden goose. You have to have a certain amount of them, but you also have to have them in positions of power. And over the past 60 years, they've been attacked on every front. So Trump is poison because there is a detrimental reliance situation going on where when he leaves, America will be less white than when he came in. He's importing more than he's deporting is one side of it, but the other is that the non-white imports are high birth rate. So you would have to be deporting them, their families, their kids right now, and you go, well, constitutional issues, and you're just going to have to ignore that. When you're saving a nation, it's like, yeah, Constitution's great, but it's a piece of paper. If you want to save the nation, you just save the nation right here and now. And the legal arguments can come later. So Harris would have been better to accelerate the destruction, which would have caused a rebellion, which would be the only way to remove millions of foreigners and save part of the country. You can't save it all because the people who want to save it are already a minority. The best they would be able to do is to take a few states. America is not going to deport 50 million foreigners. That's an impossibility. The time to save the whole country would have been in the 60s at the latest. So what did Cracker Barrel do? Well, they changed their brand by changing the interior decorations and signs, which doesn't do anything to bring in new customers. It just makes it fungible with every other brand. Part of the reason they did it, or why Disney or Hollywood in general do what they do, or why Larry Fink's BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street, and the rest do what they do, is they fundamentally hate European people and are working day in and day out to destroy America, Canada, all of Europe, Australia, New Zealand. And if I sound a little tinfoil hat, by all means, take a look at the demographics and quality of life decade by decade, starting in 1955 and move forward. As the demographics declined, so did the value of the dollar and the quality of life. In the mid-60s, they opened the borders and had integration, so you had groups, and that was at gunpoint, with irreconcilable differences living together. Then in 71, they went off the gold standard under Nixon and Kissinger, and wages stopped tracking inflation. Which reminds me, what happened to the audit of Fort Knox that Trump promised? Well, like everything else he promised, it never happened. Fell for it again award. Over the past 100+ years, starting with the Federal Reserve in 13, they have turned a nation of the Natal into a commercial zone controlled by bankers and NGOs, outside foreign interests. No foreign country should be able to buy anything in America, not farmland. That's insane. America is in so much trouble, but as long as the food is still affordable, people will just keep eating. They'll keep doing these deflection activities like playing video games, manga, anime, sports ball. So they changed the sign back. Well, the underlying issue hasn't changed. The country is run by people who hate it and are anti-white, and woke hasn't gone anywhere either. See, the thing is, if Kamala got elected, it would be the only thing that would force people to turn off the TV or the tablet and start having quiet meetings in their living rooms. Accelerationism is the logical solution, but admittedly, it's scary. And this probably puts me on Palantir's wrong think list, which, so what Biden had Nina Jankowicz and the Ministry of Truth. Oh, well, 1984. Yeah, yeah. So Trump has Peter Thiel and Palantir? Like, for real? And then he's also like, U.S. government is now taking ownership interest in some companies. Like, oh, isn't there a word for that? I think there is. It starts with a C. Where they're literally working on analyzing pre-crime from Minority Report. Is that Philip K. Dick? I don't forget who wrote that. Which should sound crazy because if you wanted to stop crime, you'd have more police in Detroit and Chicago because there's 1 to 2 homicides there every day. You would massively increase prison sentences and the death penalty. Instead, they went the opposite direction, and the punishments are so soft that the criminals don't care because it's catch and release. They want the prisons full of short-time people who take time and money to get processed in and then get processed out. It wastes a ton of resources for crimes that they should be in prison for decades because that's the only thing that acts as a deterrent. Or even if you really can't change people, if you take someone off the street for 20 years, they're a young man, they're full of testosterone, they're doing really low impulse control, violent, stupid stuff like that Raja guy. If he's 25, you put him in prison for 20 years, he gets out at 45. By 45, he is a different person. He's going to be a whole lot calmer. And if nothing else, you've taken him away from hurting people for 20 years. So they want the prisons busy so they can say, well, look, the prison system doesn't work. We're putting people in for 18 months. It's like, yeah, because they should be in for 18 years and the prisons are overcrowded. They have people serving a few years that should be serving decades, or they should be, after legally processed, put to death. They set the conditions to get so bad to create a police state with militaristic police, except the criminals don't actually serve hard time. So it's like a display of force, and the police are out there. They're doing what they're supposed to do, arrest people, but the judicial side of it is just not keeping them in. So Palantir and the militarized police, they're for you, not for the denizens of Detroit. Because they don't fear those people because they're not able to ever get organized, take control, and start a country like, founding fathers did. I just finished this book, 1776, about Washington's point of view. They fear those kind of people who have that heritage. People like you are able to do these kind of 1776 things. Anyway, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you all next episode.